Welcome to the Right News Network.
Welcome to your World News Update. I'm Emma, bringing you today's top stories from around the globe. We turn now to the escalating diplomatic crisis between Washington and Tehran. The Trump administration is reviewing Iran's latest peace proposal, but early signals suggest the talks may be heading nowhere fast. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has the latest. Layla?
Well, Emma, Iran submitted a 14-point response to the U.S. proposal this week, and Trump said Saturday he's reviewing it. But here's the thing. He's already made it pretty clear he doesn't think it'll work. So we're seeing this kind of dance where both sides are on the table, but there's real skepticism about whether either one actually wants a deal.
What specifically is Trump saying about Iran's offer?
Look, Trump told reporters he'd be reviewing the plan soon, but he flat out said he doesn't think he can make a deal. I mean, that's not exactly the language of someone optimistic about negotiations. What's interesting is he also sent a letter to Congress claiming hostilities have basically terminated due to a ceasefire. So on one hand, he's saying things are calming down, but on the other, he's rejecting the actual peace proposal. It's mixed signals, honestly.
Layla, appreciate the clarity on this. Still on world affairs, this military decision could reshape America's relationship with its oldest allies. Layla, you are still here and have been tracking the Middle East angle on this story. What's driving the administration's strategy?
That's right, Emma. Well, here's the thing. While they're pulling troops out of Germany, they're simultaneously dumping $8.6 billion in weapons into the hands of Gulf allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It's all about Iran. The administration sees Europe as unreliable on Iran policy, frankly, and they're betting that Gulf partners will back whatever regional conflict comes next.
But doesn't weakening NATO simultaneously weaken the entire Western alliance?
Look, I mean, that's the contradiction nobody's talking about. You can't simultaneously say Europe matters and then yank troops and cash while pivoting everything eastward. What's interesting is this tells Middle Eastern players that America's commitment to traditional alliances is transactional now. That changes everything about how Iran calculates its next move.
Layla, appreciate the clarity on this. Also on the world front, the U.S. is pulling 5,000 troops from Germany over the next year, a move that has NATO allies scrambling for answers. The withdrawal signals deepening uncertainty about America's security commitments in Europe at a time when tensions with Russia remain high. Watch for whether other European nations face similar reductions. Also on the aviation front, one of America's largest budget airlines has stopped flying entirely, stranding thousands of passengers and raising questions about how the Trump administration weighs bailout requests. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb has this. Marcus?
Well, Emma, Spirit Airlines shut down operations completely over the weekend after a last-minute rescue deal with the Trump administration fell apart. The airline had been bleeding money for years, dealing with higher fuel costs and a debt load that just became unmanageable. The White House actually proposed a $500 million bailout package, but negotiations with bondholders failed, and the deal never came together. Now every Spirit flight is canceled, and passengers are basically stuck.
What's the political pressure the White House faced on this?
Look, here's the thing. A lot of Trump allies in Congress were really opposed to this bailout. They didn't want to see federal money going to prop up a struggling private airline, no matter how big it is. There's this fundamental disagreement on Capitol Hill about whether the government should be rescuing companies at all. And honestly, that political opposition probably made it harder to get the deal across the finish line.
Marcus, appreciate it. Moving to the business world now, one of the most watched tech trials in recent memory is underway, with Elon Musk accusing OpenAI's leadership of deception. Our finance editor, Sophia Reeves, has been following the courtroom drama. Sophia?
Well, Emma, this is a pretty extraordinary moment. Elon Musk, the world's richest person, spent 3 days on the witness stand this week arguing that Sam Altman and Greg Brockman basically misled him about what OpenAI was supposed to be. He says he thought he was funding a nonprofit that would be safety-focused, but that's not what happened. And look, what's really interesting is that during his testimony, he also warned that AI could literally destroy humanity.
Did Musk acknowledge anything that could hurt his own case?
I mean, honestly, he did. He admitted that his own company, XAI, has distilled OpenAI's models in their development work. So that's not a great look for him when he's trying to claim he's the victim of corporate malfeasance. The thing is, a ton of evidence is coming out right now. Emails, photos, corporate documents from OpenAI's founding period, and both sides are interpreting that evidence completely differently.
Thank you, Sophia. Appreciate it. We're following developing tensions in the Middle East, where incoming President Trump is warning the United States could restart military strikes on Iran. The statement comes as Ukrainian President Zelensky tours Gulf nations seeking financial and military support, potentially complicating his own ceasefire negotiations with Russia. Watch for whether Trump's rhetoric translates into military action in the coming weeks. The abortion pill mifepristone is back in the courts. Drug manufacturers asked the Supreme Court Saturday to block a lower court ruling that cuts off mail-order access to the medication. The Fifth Circuit's decision, issued Friday, forces patients to pick up the drug in person, restricting access that was greatly expanded by FDA regulations just days earlier. Moving to a story of digital resistance in Iran, where internet blackouts have become a weapon of control. An activist named Sahand is running an underground operation smuggling Starlink satellite terminals into the country to give ordinary Iranians uncensored access to information. As the government tightens its grip on connectivity, this clandestine network faces mounting pressure from Iranian authorities. A major volcanic eruption is unfolding in the Philippines right now, forcing thousands to flee their homes. Our Asia correspondent James Chen is following developments. James?
Well, Emma, Mayon volcano in the Bicol region, just south of Manila, erupted Sunday, sending up this massive ash cloud that's blanketed the entire area. Authorities moved fast. They've evacuated thousands of people and established a 6-kilometer danger zone around the volcano. Right now, the focus is really on keeping people safe and monitoring whether this thing escalates further.
How are residents coping with this displacement?
Look, these are agricultural and fishing communities, so economically they're already vulnerable. Ash is contaminating crops, water supplies are at risk, and families don't know when they can return home. What's interesting is the government's early warning systems actually worked. They spotted the activity early enough to get people out before things got worse. That said, uncertainty breeds anxiety, and people are understandably worried about what comes next.
James, appreciate the latest from the region. On the energy front, two of America's biggest oil giants just posted earnings that beat expectations, but the story behind those numbers reveals some real vulnerabilities in the sector. Back to Marcus. Marcus, what's driving these strong results?
Well, Emma, both Chevron and Exxon saw their upstream operations really fire on all cylinders. Chevron's adjusted earnings came in at $1.41 a share, which crushed what analysts were expecting. The big driver here is crude prices just surged throughout the quarter. You had disruptions tied to Iran tensions, the Strait of Hormuz effectively shut down, so crude went higher, and that lifted the whole upstream business. Chevron's upstream segment alone pulled in $3.9 billion, up 4% year over year.
But I noticed Chevron's refining side actually swung to losses. How's that possible when oil prices are climbing?
That's the thing, Emma. When crude prices spike really fast, refining margins actually get crushed. Your refineries can't process that crude and move refined products out the door fast enough to keep pace with the price move. So you get stuck holding expensive inventory at margins that have basically evaporated. It's a classic squeeze that hits when the commodity moves too quick.
So these companies are still hostage to what happens in the Middle East.
Look, That's the underlying story here. These earnings are strong because of geopolitical risk, not because of underlying demand growth. If Iran tensions cool down or that strait opens back up, crude prices could reverse just as fast as they climbed, and suddenly those upstream numbers don't look so pretty. That's the vulnerability baked into energy sector valuations right now.
Marcus, appreciate the insight? Now, our in-depth analysis of the day. The story dominating the headlines, examined from every angle. Iran has submitted a 14-point peace proposal to the United States. President Trump says he's reviewing it, but doesn't think he can make a deal, having flatly rejected it just 24 hours earlier. Meanwhile, Iran is executing citizens accused of spying for Israel. The Strait of Hormuz is under effective closure, choking global energy markets, and Trump has told Congress that hostilities have terminated, sidestepping the War Powers Act entirely. This is either the beginning of the end of the Iran crisis or the calm before a very dangerous storm. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is Trump negotiating from a position of strength here, or is this diplomatic chaos dressed up as strategy?
Thanks, Emma. And I want to be very clear. What we are watching is not chaos. What we are watching is maximum pressure diplomacy working exactly as intended. Think about where we were 18 months ago. Iran was enriching uranium at 60%. Biden's team was desperately trying to resurrect a deal that Tehran was laughing at. Now Iran is submitting 14-point proposals, and America is fast-tracking arms sales to regional partners. That is a fundamentally different power dynamic. Douglas Murray has made this point repeatedly. The Islamic Republic only moves when it feels existential pressure, and for the first time in years, it is feeling that pressure on every front simultaneously. Its oil revenues are being strangled. Its military infrastructure has been degraded. Its proxy network in Lebanon is being pounded by Israel as we speak. Trump told Congress hostilities have terminated. That is a legal maneuver, yes, but it is also a signal that America is dictating the terms of this endgame, not Tehran. The one thing I would caution is this. A bad deal struck quickly to declare political victory would be far more dangerous than no deal at all.
But Marcus, isn't there a real risk that Trump's mixed messaging, rejecting the deal one day, reviewing it the next, joking about invading Cuba on the way home, is giving Tehran space to play games and buy time? And Sophia, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Marcus is right that the pressure is working economically, and I want to give credit where it's due. The blockade is genuinely devastating Iran's oil sector. They were exporting around 1.4 million barrels a day under Biden's looser enforcement. That revenue funds 30 to 40% of the regime's budget. You cut that off. You are not just inconveniencing them, you are threatening the entire financial architecture of the theocracy. Here's what I think Marcus is missing, though. The Strait of Hormuz closure isn't just hurting Iran. 20% of global oil supply transits that strait. The Telegraph ran a piece this week on Britain's food chain, and the numbers are genuinely alarming. We're talking about a country that imports 35% of its food and is critically exposed to energy market disruption. Every week this drags on. The economic cost to Western allies compounds. So yes, the pressure is working. But the question is whether our own economies can sustain the pressure longer than Tehran can. And right now, I'm not confident that British or European policymakers have any serious plan for that scenario.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. You do not lift pressure on a regime that is executing its own citizens for spying and submitting half measures dressed up as peace proposals. That is the lesson of the JCPOA. The moment the West blinks, the moment we decide the economic pain is too much, Tehran recalibrates, and you are back to square one. Worse than square one, actually, because they now know exactly what threshold will make you flinch. The economic pain in Britain is real. I'm not dismissing it. But that is an argument for Britain getting serious about its own energy security, not an argument for letting Iran off the hook. And frankly, a jury found an illegal immigrant guilty this week of attempting a knife attack on the Israeli embassy in London. While we're talking about Iran's nuclear program, there are people already in our cities acting on behalf of the very ideology we're supposedly confronting abroad. The threat isn't just geopolitical, it's right here.
Here's what I want to know. Because both of you are assuming Western resolve holds. Iran has submitted this proposal. Trump is skeptical. The executions are continuing in 6 months' time. Where does this actually land? Sophia, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, and I want to be careful because this is genuinely unpredictable, is a prolonged standoff with compounding economic consequences. If the Hormuz disruption continues through summer and into autumn, you're looking at an energy price shock that hits European economies very hard. The trajectory suggests political pressure will build on governments in London and Brussels to push for some kind of interim deal, not because it's strategically wise, but because their populations are feeling it at the pump and the supermarket. The risk is that Western resolve fractures along economic fault lines before Iran's regime actually breaks. That's not a prediction, but if current trends continue, that is the most likely pressure point.
Here's what concerns me most, the third scenario that nobody wants to talk about. A regime under this level of simultaneous pressure, military, economic, internal executions suggesting paranoia about loyalty, doesn't always respond rationally. History tells us that cornered authoritarian governments have calculated that escalation offers better survival odds than capitulation. The risk of an Iranian provocation against shipping, against U.S. assets, against Israel directly, designed to internationalize this conflict and rally domestic support, is real, and it is being underestimated. If that happens, Trump's letter to Congress saying hostilities have terminated becomes irrelevant overnight. And the question of whether we were prepared militarily, economically, politically becomes the only question that matters.
Powerful analysis from both of you. Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves, thank you. One thing's certain tonight, somewhere in Tehran, they're reading that 14-point proposal back very carefully and wondering if they've already run out of time. It is one of the most storied events in American sporting history, and this year's 152nd Kentucky Derby delivered drama in spades. At 23-1 odds, Golden Tempo stormed home to win at Churchill Downs, while trainer Sherry DeVos made history as the first woman ever to train a Kentucky Derby winner. Add to that the late chaos at the starting gate. Great White spooked, threw its jockey, and was scratched before the race began, and you had a derby for the ages. But already the commentary is taking some interesting turns, and the way this story gets told in the weeks ahead may matter more than the race result itself. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Is Sherry DeVos' achievement being reported honestly, or is the media already turning a genuine meritocracy story into something else?
Thanks, Emma. Look, let me say this clearly. What Sherry DeVos achieved on Saturday is genuinely extraordinary, and it deserves to be celebrated with full force. She trained a 23-1 long shot to win the most competitive horse race in America. That is a story of preparation, expertise, and competitive excellence that should make every American proud. But here's the thing. I've already seen the framing beginning to shift, and it concerns me deeply. Certain outlets are positioning this victory as evidence that a barrier has been broken, that the system was previously exclusionary, that we should read into 151 years of male trainers winning as some kind of structural failure. And I think Douglas Murray would recognize that framing instantly. It's the same habit of mind that turns every unequal outcome into evidence of discrimination, regardless of what actually produced that outcome. The uncomfortable truth is that Sherry DeVos didn't win because an institution changed. She won because her horse was better prepared on the day. And if we can't say that straightforwardly, we've lost the ability to tell honest stories about excellence.
But, Sophia, isn't there a legitimate point that representation matters, that seeing a woman win as a trainer might inspire other women to pursue the sport at the highest level? Isn't that a reasonable thing to acknowledge? And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I think Sophia's making an important point, but I also think she's swinging slightly too hard at a target that isn't entirely fair. Here's what I think Sophia is missing. Yes, the identity politics framing is a trap, And yes, it's intellectually dishonest when applied reflexively. But the simple factual statement that no woman had trained a Derby winner in 151 years, and now one has, that is a genuinely significant historical data point. You don't have to wrap it in grievance language to acknowledge it matters. What the data actually shows us is that this industry has been dominated by a particular demographic, not through conspiracy, but through the ordinary dynamics of who pursued it at elite levels and when. DeVos's victory is proof of concept. The market worked. Excellence was rewarded. That's actually the free market argument, not the DEI argument. And I'd rather we made that case loudly than ceded the story entirely to the progressive framing.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. The moment we start saying the data point about her gender is significant, we've already conceded the framework. We've already agreed that the most important thing about her victory is her demographic rather than her skill. That's exactly backwards. Think about it this way. When a male trainer wins the Derby, we don't lead with man trains Derby winner. The excellence is the story. Full stop. And I'll tell you what really concerns me here. Once you establish that demographic firsts are the primary lens through which sporting achievement gets reported, you've changed the culture of how we understand competition. Short, punchy truth. Merit should be the whole story. It was the whole story at Churchill Downs on Saturday. Let's keep it that way.
Here's what I want to know. The Kentucky Derby has survived 151 years, and every cultural upheaval in between. But where does it go from here? Is this tradition genuinely safe? Or are we watching the slow beginning of an institutional transformation that will change it beyond recognition? James, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, and this is based on watching what's happened to every other major sporting institution over the last decade, the Derby itself is actually more resilient than most because its outcome is determined by an animal. You cannot DEI your way to a faster horse. The market mechanism at the core of this sport is almost incorruptible in that specific sense. What the trajectory suggests is that the pressure will come not from the race itself, but from the surrounding apparatus, the media coverage, the corporate sponsorships, the activist campaigns around animal welfare that sometimes function as a cultural proxy war against the tradition itself. If Churchill Downs manages that pressure with the same strategic intelligence that DeVos brought to Saturday's race, the event survives intact. If they start making concessions to silence critics rather than to improve the sport, the risk is a slow institutional hollowing out that takes 20 years to complete, but is irreversible once it starts.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario that keeps me up at night. It's not the big dramatic attack on the Kentucky Derby that destroys it. It's the thousand small accommodations. It's the year they quietly change the aesthetic to be more inclusive. It's the year the corporate sponsor demands the broadcaster lead with the diversity angle rather than the racing angle. It's the year someone in Louisville decides the hats are problematic. None of those things individually kill a 151-year-old institution. But cumulatively, history tells us that's exactly how you lose things that took generations to build. Sherry DeVos won this race by not cutting corners. The lesson for Churchill Downs is the same. Don't cut the corners of your own tradition to appease people who weren't coming to the Derby anyway.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen, a genuinely fascinating debate, and one that's far from over. One thing is certain, at 23-1 odds, Golden Tempo didn't ask for anyone's permission before crossing that finish line first. And maybe that's the most American thing about this whole story.
That's all for this update. Stay informed and stay connected. I'm Emma. We'll be back shortly.